Now that we have two components in our game, I am going to show you an interesting feature. So these two components, this is my position component and this is my rectangle component. These are added to the game separately in our game class. So we added these two components separately, but we can always add a component inside another component. For example, we already have this my position component, right? So what if I add this rectangle component inside or as a part of this position component? We can do so. So let's go inside our my position component, and I'm going to disable this angle so that the angle is 0 pointing upwards. And now after that I'm going to add our rectangle component. So add my rectangle component. Now we have to define the position and we have to define the size. So let's say the size would be, let's say that would be vector2 dot all, that would be like 50. So x value is 50 and the y value is 50, a perfect square. But what about the position? So you have to understand where we are actually adding this my rectangle component. So we are adding my rectangle component inside our my position component. So now the position of this my position component becomes the local position for this rectangle component. What do I mean by this? So if I now provide, for example, if I now provide a vector or position like vector2, let's say it is 100 and this is 100. So what do you think where this my rectangle component should be on the screen? So 100 means maybe you are thinking of this game screen. This is 00, this is 100 and this is 100. So this should be there. But you have to always remember where we are actually adding a component. So we are adding this my rectangle component inside my position component. So this component or this point over here, let me restart the application. And also, okay, I need to put a semicolon here and let me restart the application. Okay, so you see something very unfamiliar, because we have provided the position for this rectangle is 100 by 100, but we were assuming that 100 by 100 should be somewhere here. So from 0 to 100 and along the y-axis 100. So this my rectangle component should be there, but not there. It is somewhere here. This is because this my rectangle component is now a direct child of this my position component. And this point of this my position component becomes the 0 or the origin for this my rectangle component, or where the anchor point actually is. So that's why 100 by 100 actually put this my rectangle component at this position. What if we provided 0 and 0 at 0, 0 position? So what do you think? Where would you like to see this my rectangle component? If I hit restart, then you will see that 0, 0 position is just here. And since the anchor for this my rectangle component is at the center, so the rectangle component is put at the top left corner of the position component. So for this rectangle component, the size of this position component becomes the origin for this rectangle component. Okay, so what if I want to put this rectangle component at the center of my position component? So this is very easy, very easy. So what I'm going to do is, for the position, I'm going to provide size. Size means the size of this my position component. That means 200 by 200, and divide by 2. That will point to the center of this my position component. If I hit restart, and now this my rectangle component at the center of this position component. So now this becomes the child of this component. So the global coordinate system will not work for this my position my rectangle component. Another thing is, now I want to rotate this my position component. So will that affect the inner component or this my rectangle component? So what if I enable this line one more time and say this is positive 45 degrees to the right. So if I restart, and now you will see that my position component has been rotated to the right or east 45 degrees. And also my rectangle component has rotated. But we didn't rotate this my rectangle component separately. So when the parent is rotated, all the child components will be rotated as well. Also, if you plan to provide some different angle for the inner component or my rectangle component, you can do so. Inside my rectangle component, we can provide different angle. But the main thing is everything will change. Whenever anything changes for my position component, that will be also applied for the child component. Okay, so another thing I want to do right now is I want to draw something on this my rectangle component. Well, we are using rectangle component and we know that we don't have to render anything by ourselves, but if we want something to draw on the rectangle, then we can always override the render method. For example, I want like a white circle at the top of the rectangle to identify the top of the box. To whenever we see that dot, that means we will understand that this is the top of the box. So what we can do is I'm going to once again disable this angle, and then I'm going to go or open my rectangle component, and here I'm going to override the render method one more time. So render, so that will be this one. No, not this one, not render tree. That will be only render. Okay, so this one, and we always have to call super.render and pass the canvas. And what I need to do is I want a white circle at the top of the rectangle, actually in the middle, or we can say at the top center of this rectangle. So what we can do is we can use the canvas and we can say canvas.draw, this time a circle, and the circle we first need the offset. I mean the center, where would be the center of the circle, and also we need to provide a radius, and then we need to provide a paint object. So let's define a paint object not directly inside this render method, because we know that render method is called approximately 60 frame per second. I mean 60 times per second. So we should not create any object over here. That's why I'm going to create a separate paint object. Let's say final paint, let's say circle paint, and let's say the color would be not blue but white. Okay, now we will use this circle paint over here. So that would be circle paint. And let's say the radius would be, for example, what is the width of this rectangle component? What is the width? So when we created this my rectangle component from inside this my position component, we provided the size is 50. So maybe we want the radius like the 10% of the size of this rectangle component. So let's say that would be size.x. That means it is actually 50, and I am multiplying this value with 0.10. That means the radius would be 10% of the total size. That means 10% of 50. Okay. And what about the offset? Why we want to put the center of the circle? So we need to provide an offset, and we need to specify the x value. So the x value would be size.x divided by 2. That means in the center, and the y value could be like 5 or 10, maybe like 5. If the radius is 10% of the size, then we should also specify the height, this one, okay, over this one. Okay, so now if I hit run and see, you see there is a white circle at the top of the screen. So this actually indicates that, okay, this is the top of the circle. So now if I try to rotate one more time my position component and hit run, so now you see the outer component, that means the position component, is rotated 45 degree east, and also the inner component, which is the rectangle component, also rotated to the east, that means positive 45 degrees.